So now we're going to be taking a look at Neon Genesis Evangelion, or for short is EVA. And it's quite possibly one of the most popular animes of all time, not only because of the fact that it was very popular within the 90s, but it's also very popular even to this day. People still talk about it. And I have watched this show before, but it's been quite some time since I've last seen it, so this can go either way. So for now, let's talk about the story. So it begins in the year 2015. Holy shit, last year? How come I never heard about any of this shit happening? Anyways, 15 years prior to 2015, so the year 2000, a whole shitstorm happened called Second Impact. So the world is entirely in danger, mostly due to these monsters called angels. Yeah, I should also say that this show does have a lot of religious references. So it's a post-apocalyptic world, but it doesn't look like a wasteland or anything, considering that there's still cars, power, electricity, you name it. So it follows the main character named Shinji Ikari. He's an average student who got transferred into town mostly because his dad actually needs him for once. His dad happened to be the leader of a company called Nerve, and his name had to be Gendo, and he's a huge dickhead. Because he uses his son as a tool, and he's also abandoned him when he was very young, so yeah, like I already said, fucking dickhead. So Shinji ends up meeting up with Masato Katsuragi, who happens to be the chief officer at Nerve. So she is escorting him at the main base, and he finally meets his father after so many years. And the first thing he says to him is, "Get in the fucking Eva, you pussy." Well, obviously he didn't say exactly that, but that would have been pretty funny. So anyways, Shinji ends up refusing him and just crying about it for half an hour. So Gendo ends up wanting someone else to fly the thing, and that happens to be Rei, who happens to be very injured. So Shinji ends up changing his mind because he feels really bad that his dad has to make a girl that is very injured flying an Eva. So what is an Eva, you might ask? Well, this is kind of a confusing one to explain, but the easiest way to say it is that they're the mechs of this show, but they're not entirely mechs, they're also kind of like cyborgs. It's really weird, but also kind of different. And that explains why the Evas start bleeding whenever they get hit. So eventually, Shinji ends up going into the Eva and gets launched up to the surface where the Angel is attacking. So as soon as he gets up there, he gets his ass kicked by the Angel, like, massively. But he ends up getting knocked out, but what happens here is that when he is unconscious, the Eva starts beating the shit out of the Angel on its own. So Shinji ends up saving everyone on that day without even realizing it. So after all that, Shinji ends up going to the hospital, and after he recovers a little bit, he ends up moving into Katsuragi's apartment. And she happens to be a very messy person and also happens to have a pet penguin. Why? Because why the fuck not? So Shinji ends up having to do training for Nerve just because, you know, who else would actually do the training because no one else is available. So he doesn't like doing it, but he has to do it anyway. Eventually he ends up going to school and he meets two people named Toji and Kansaki. Now Toji is kind of like a jock guy, but he also eventually wants to become a pilot. And Kansaki is an otaku guy who is just fucking irritating. So they end up actually helping each other out in some way or form. And I also should mention that Rei also happens to go to the same school, but she is very socially withdrawn. And then the last character I should mention is Asuka, and she eventually does go to the school, but they end up meeting her on a ship on a mission. And she's kinda like a tsundere type, meaning that she's harsh towards others, but of course she does have her reasons. So this happened to be a very popular characteristic because of the show. You know, you have like the nerdy square guy as the main character, then you got the quiet type, and then you got the tsundere type. Anyways, the three main characters are pilots because they're the only ones who can fly the Unit 1, Unit 0, and Unit 2. And whenever an angel attacks the city, they have to work together. So I think I'm gonna stop it right there because I think that explains what you need to know about the show, at least the basics of it. So now, what are my thoughts on the story? The easiest way I can explain this is that I find the show is kinda mixed, where there are some things that I like, and there are some things that I'm not really a huge fan of. So let's talk about the good stuff. Personally, I like the concept of the story, and I also really like the setting as well, and the ideas behind the Evas is interesting. So that's all well and good, but as for the stuff that I'm not a huge fan of, well, it has to be the characters. Now I'll say it right here, these are not the worst characters I've ever seen. Hell, I wouldn't even say that they're even bad characters, but here's the thing. Now, regarding Shinji, it seems like he gets a mixed reaction where there's a lot of people that like him because he perfectly portrays a regular human being, and then there's a lot of people that hate him because he is an annoying pansy. Now as for me, I'm kind of in the middle on this because I do understand both sides where yes, he is fucking annoying and he can even be like irritating at times, but at the same time it's like, well, he is only a human being and humans aren't perfect. So I do appreciate what they're trying to do with his character here, and well, I thought he was just kinda okay. Not awesome and not horrible, just kinda okay. And as for Rei, I actually think she's not a bad character. She's probably my favorite character within this show. Mostly because I think she has some pretty good development. So I guess that's not really a bad thing, but it's something that I will have to mention. And as for Asuka, I'm not really a huge fan of her. I mean, she's alright, yeah, she has a deep dark backstory, which is okay and all. But I just really was not liking her all that much. I mean, she's not an awful character either, it's just, you know, just kinda okay. So that's my thoughts on the main characters, but as for the other thing that I didn't particularly care for is that some parts in this show can be a little bit slow. Normally you'd think it'd be the beginning of the show would be slow, but actually no, the beginning of the show is fine. I just find it's the middle part that does kind of drag on a little bit. But other than these things, I find the show is actually not too bad, it's just, you know, a little bit overblown. And I should also mention that the show does have some pretty amusing parts. Nothing that comes off as campy, but just pretty amusing. So now, let's move on to animation, and all I have to say here is that I actually think the animation is actually really good. I find everything actually looks pretty nice, especially the battle scenes, and the character designs are actually really cool. And speaking of which, I should also mention that I find that the Evas awfully look a lot like Guyver, which is pretty interesting. And the settings and such are actually pretty nice looking, so overall, I don't have much complaints about the animation, and well, I think it does actually look pretty good. Now, as for the music in this show, I also do find it does sound pretty good. So it suits the tone pretty well, although I do find that some of the songs aren't the most memorable thing ever, but there are some songs that do sound pretty cool. So with that being said, I do find that the music is still a pretty good one. But as for the opening theme song, oh man, I fucking love the opening theme song. You know the one I'm talking about. It's like so damn catchy, I just fucking love it. It's actually one of my favorite anime theme songs. And every time I hear it, I always feel like I have to dance to it. It's just that catchy to me, so either way, there's not a lot I can say about it, but just I really enjoy it. So now, as for the voice acting, I find it to be a little bit all over the place. So Shinji is being played by Spike Spencer, who happens to be one of my many favorite voice actors. And he does do a pretty decent job at him. Yeah, even though he can be annoying as him, at least he did well for what he had to work with. And something that really amused me about him is that there was an interview I watched of him once, and he gave out his thoughts on Shinji, and he said, I love and hate Shinji because he can be really annoying, but at the same time he's actually a good portrayal of a human character, you know, like I explained earlier. So it's pretty interesting knowing that the person that played his voice even gets irritated at him. It's pretty hilarious when you think about it. And then Rei is being played by Amanda Wynn Lee, and she's actually a pretty good one, but she does an okay job here. Not great, but definitely not terrible. But then again, she doesn't really talk a whole lot in the show, but for what she does talk, I think she does sound fine. And then Asuka is being played by Tiffany Grant, and she's actually okay, but I do find her voice can be a little bit inconsistent at times. Like, there are some lines that she says that sound really good, and then there are some that just kind of sound like they just threw them away. So as I said, it's a little bit inconsistent, but I gotta give her credit for one thing, is that the parts where she speaks German actually does sound like German. Well, as far as I can tell anyways, which is, not very. And then Katsuragi is being played by Allison Keith. This is another role that is kind of inconsistent, where there are some lines that she says that sound really good, and then there are some lines that just sound kind of thrown away. Now, as much as I would like to go into every individual role, the thing is, it's going to take a bit of time here. But to sum it all up, there are some roles here that are actually not too bad, and then there are some that are just kind of inconsistent, you know, where there are some lines that they say that are really good, and then there are some lines that they say that are not very good. Which is why I think the dub for this anime is all over the place. So it's definitely not great, but it's also not horrible either, it's just kind of in the middle. Now, if I were to rate this one, I'm gonna have to give it a 6 out of 10. Yeah, some of you might be thinking I'm being a little bit harsh here, but here's the thing though. I find the show to be decent at best, meaning that it's not amazing, it's not horrible, but it's also not really mediocre either, so I think giving it a 6 suits it well for me. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people that are going to disagree with me here, and that's totally fine. But to me, a 6 out of 10 is not the worst thing in the world. I mean, what, would you rather me give it like a 4 out of 10, or a 3 out of 10, or a 1? Because if that were the case, I'd be lying. So anyways, I think the show is actually not too bad, but it's definitely a little bit overrated. And like I always say, just because something is overrated does not mean it is bad. Now, when I first watched this show, I actually thought it was pretty good, but now that I watched it again, well, yeah, it definitely wasn't as good, but it also wasn't that bad either. I mean, it still had some pretty good parts. And then it had some parts that I think could have been done a little bit better. But I gotta give them some credit here, is that at least they did come up with a pretty good concept. And this show also inspired many things, and one of those things happens to be Xenogears, and well, that game fucking rules. So with that being said, I think the show is decent at best, but of course, I should mention that no, Shinji is not the Jar Jar Binks of anime. I mean, yeah, he's annoying at times, and you just want to smack him across the face a whole bunch of times, but there's plenty of other main characters that are a lot more annoying than him. Just figured I'd mention that at the end, so anyways, congratulations, you made it through the review.